Marriage Today presents Real Sexual Intimacy and Fulfillment by Jimmy Evans.
I want to talk about real sexual intimacy and fulfillment. I just want to talk about some of the real issues that we go through in order to have fulfilling sex. Now, first of all, I want to talk about real inhibitions and misconceptions about God. This is so interesting to me. I wrote a book called The Fig Leaf Conspiracy, and the Fig Leaf Conspiracy is all about the deception of sex in our culture. God created sex. The devil didn't create sex. God created sex. And God created everything He created, and at the end of Genesis 1 it says, He saw everything, He created it, and said it was very good. And sex was included in that. Let me talk about the parameters that God has put on sex for just a minute. God has put parameters on sex, so let me just give them to you right here. No adultery, and which just means sex with, outside of marriage with a married person, or you're married. Fornication, incest, obviously pedophilia, bestiality, rape, pornography, fantasy, lust. Jesus said if you look with intent, that's the same as committing the act because it begins on the inside. Well, those are God's parameters on sex. And so what the devil wants us to believe is the parameters that God put on sex are there to keep us from having fun. And so we have to make up our minds, are the parameters that God put on sex a fence to keep us safe or a fence to keep us away from having fun? And what I believe is the parameters that God put on sex are to keep us safe within the boundaries of sex. And so I want to ask this question, so what is allowed? These are things, the Bible clearly says what is not allowed. When the Bible says something specifically, it's specific. It just says that's wrong. Okay, so we can just say, okay, that's wrong. Well, what about other things? Because God made our bodies where we can have pleasure and have orgasm without having intercourse. Now, God could have made our bodies in such a way that we could only have had pleasure with intercourse. He could have done anything He wanted to. But God has made us where there's many different ways that we can experience sexual pleasure without doing anything wrong. And a lot of times we get questions. We get questions here at the ministry. And these kind of questions, what about oral sex? That's a big question that Christian couples ask. What about oral sex? What about sex toys? What about vibrators? What are things like that? Well, we don't have an answer, a specific answer to those, saying, oh yeah, go for it, that's fine, or no, you're going to go to hell. We don't say that. Here's what we say, and I want you to understand this. Here's some questions. In other words, we know what's wrong, it's clear. But what if something isn't clear? And you're thinking to yourself, is that something that's okay in marriage? Well, here's some questions. Is it clearly forbidden in the Bible? Well, those things are not clearly forbidden. I mean, there are a lot of things that are not clearly forbidden that you may be wondering about. Do we both agree on it? I mean, one person shouldn't be enforcing this on the other spouse. I mean, it ought to be something that you agree on. Is it physically unsafe or harmful? Obviously, you shouldn't be doing anything that's, puts you at physical risk. Does it harm our relationship? Is this something that after we do it, it's going to be bad for our relationship? Well, let me say, if it isn't clearly forbidden in the Bible, you both agree on it, it's physically safe, and it's good for your relationship or whatever, you ought to do it. You ought to do it 8 times. And I'm going to go back to what I said about God. Our God is not a fuddy-duddy. Our God is the funnest person ever. The Bible says, in His right hand are pleasures forevermore. All the real fun in the world, God created. And everything else the devil created, and it's destructive. And I've been on both sides of the fence. I was a very immoral person before I married Karen. 1 week before we got married, she told me she wouldn't marry me for how immoral I was. So I wasn't born a preacher. I was a very immoral person. And I'm telling you, I experienced all that stuff, and it's empty and it's death. There's nothing there. And I've experienced this side, and I'm telling you, God's way of living is fun, and you don't feel bad afterwards, and you don't have a bad conscience afterwards. And this is, I'm just saying, a lot of people can't go here, but I'm going to go here anyway, because that's my job. And, so my thing is, when I'm considering something I'm doing, would I do this with Jesus around? Would I do this in front of Jesus? That's kind of always what I think. And you're saying, well, of course we wouldn't have sex in front of Jesus. Pardon me, you do every time you have sex. Excuse me. He is kind of omnipresent. Oh, that's gross. No, it's not. He doesn't think it's gross at all. He thinks it's wonderful. The second thing that I want to talk about as far as real sexual intimacy is real temptations and deceptions about sexuality. And I've already told you that Satan is a liar, and he's an accuser, but he's a deceiver. And I want to talk just a minute about the deception that is in our society related to sex, related to men and women. Now, we're wired differently. Men struggle with pornography. A lot of Christian men struggle with pornography. And the reason that they struggle with pornography is because we're visually stimulated, and pornography provides this visual outlet for men. But here's the lie of pornography, and it's very dangerous. This is many years ago, research proved that when a man views 3 one-hour exposures to R-rated material, it changes the way he looks at women. He begins to objectify them and to disrespect them. That's R-rated material. That's not X-rated material. But here's what pornography does, is it tells a lie. The worst thing about pornography is the lie that it tells. And what it does is it under-emotionalizes and hypersexualizes women. Women in pornography, and remember, I wasn't born a preacher. I saw in college, everything you can comprehend. I saw it and I did it. But what pornography does is it just de-emotionalizes women and it hypersexualizes them. And so when men are watching pornography, they're thinking, well, I wish my life was like that. These women are just ready to go all the time, and you don't have to talk to them about their mother's broken finger, or, the clothes dryer broke, or she's not interested in that. These women are they're wired for sex. And I mean, she is sexual. And that's what I'm looking for, is a woman that doesn't cry all the time. She doesn't have much of emotional needs. I don't have to talk to her, but she's ready to go. That woman doesn't exist. That's not real. That's not real. And I have seen men leave their wives after getting all, stirred up by pornography, because once you've watched pornography, you're convinced you got gypped. Let me tell you what a real woman is. A real woman is, you wake up in the morning, you empty the trash, you help with the kids, you kiss her on the cheek, you talk to her, you ask her how her day is, you go to work, you come home, you help around the house some more, you talk to her about her feelings, go talk to her about her emotions, pray with her about some of the things she's going through. You again help with the kids, you help around the house. And if you do all of that all day long, then once you have pastored her and been a good husband to her all day long, then she begins to feel romantic. Then she begins to feel sexual. She's not at home all day thinking about sex. You need to thank God she's not. Because you can never trust them when you walk out the door, if you think that thing through. But that's a real woman. She becomes sexual through her emotions. As you meet her emotional needs, she becomes sexual. But that's the way it is. You have to work at it. You have to pastor her. And the more you're emotionally tuned into her, the more sexual she's going to become. That's the way that it is. Pornography is a lie, and you need to reject that lie. And don't you take an accusation against your wife, because it's an accusation against her. I will not allow the devil to lie to me in that area. And there's always the comparison that goes on between those women in pornography and our wives. And I've said this now, I will not compare my wife's body to any woman who has not paid the price to bear my children. And the older Karen gets, the more beautiful she is. I've made my mind up. She's the most beautiful woman in the world. There will be no other. And I'll never compare her to anybody else. And that's the horrible thing about pornography, is the comparison that takes place. And when men put their wives under that unbelievably unfair standard to live up to this woman who is getting paid or doing it for whatever reason she's doing it, it's an unfair standard. And that's a lie from the devil that we have to reject. It's destroying our society. It's destroying marriage after marriage. And it's just wrong. We are attracted to that because it's a visual thing that comes into our world with a very attractive lie. We've got to reject that lie. But women have the same issue. Now, more and more women are involved in pornography, but women more, it's an emotional thing. And for women, it's romance novels, soap operas, chick flick movies, television, those kind of things. But women are the opposite. I'm going to call it women's pornography, because soap operas are just pornography. Romance novels are just pornography. It's just different kind of pornography. It's emotional pornography. It under-sexualizes men and hyper-emotionalizes them. Pornography hyper-sexualizes and under-emotionalizes women. But romance novels do the exact opposite. They hyper-emotionalize men and under-sexualize them. You'll notice, like, in those kinds of things. And I don't watch soap operas, and certainly don't read romance novels. They're always asking me to pose for those covers. But I don't. But you read these romance novels, there's Sir Hunk-a-Lot in there, and he talks to her, and Tiffany and Lance, their eyes met, and he touched her with his glancing touch, and she was lit afire, and he talked to her and held her, and no sex. It's at the very end of the book, But it's all about touching. In soap operas, these men, they never go outside. They stay inside all day with women and talk. And so you're watching that, it's like, oh, my husband, I just wish he would come home and talk to me like that. And you're watching that all day long, and here your husband comes in the door, it's like, oh. But what happens is the devil has created masterfully pornography for both of us. And it tells both of us a lie. It tells women that there's men out there that are hyper emotional and under-sexualized. Not normal men, they're sissies. They're not normal. No, that's not normal. Men are not like that. And it tells men that there are women out there that have no emotions and they're hypersexual. No, they're not the normal ones. That's not right. A normal woman has strong emotions, and she can be sexual, but she's put in touch with sex through a man pastoring her and loving her. And men are put in touch with their emotions through sex. A man has the capacity to be emotional, but we're the exact opposite of women. Men are never as emotional as right after they've had sex. Sometimes it's because it's been so long. But I should have said that. I crossed the line on that one. But it's truly. So what am I saying? When you come out of your world into your spouse's world and you meet their needs, you put them in touch with the other side. And you get frustrated at your wife, she's not sexual enough. Oh, she's plenty sexual. And a man who's willing to love her sacrificially is going to find out just how sexual she is. But if you're shallow and superficial, you're going to go after the cheap stuff. It's going to tell you the lie you want to hear, but it's not going to deliver. But God's way will. And you look at your husband and say, he's not emotional enough and he's too sexual. Meet his sexual needs and then talk to him about his emotions. And he'll open his entire life up to you, and you'll find what you're looking for. We have to reject the lies that the devil tells us about the opposite sex and about sexual fulfillment, and he comes into both our worlds. Let me talk about real expectations and what success looks like sexually here for just a minute. Every couple is unique, and I want to say that first of all. We're all unique, we're all different. There are certain things that we have in common, but we are unique. And I want to talk about reasonable expectations. Now, this is research, and let me just quote my source here. The first source is Sexual Dysfunction in the United States is from the Journal of the American Medical Association. And the second is a report called Male Sexuality in Couples Sexual Health, a case illustration from the Journal of Family Psychotherapy. And so these are some of the sources that I'm going to quote here. But one study that was conducted showed that approximately 45% of couples at any given time have a sexual dysfunction. 45%. And what that meant was that in sexual intercourse, that they were having difficulty either having sexual intercourse or having orgasm or having sexual intercourse without pain or something like that. So it's pretty common. And here's what these scientists found. This is very interesting. Sexual satisfaction in a relationship is fundamentally grounded on realistic physical, psychological, and relationship expectations. Unrealistic concepts precipitate frustration, a sense of failure, and distress. And what they're saying is if your expectations are wrong coming into marriage or concerning sex, it sets you up for sexual dysfunction. In other words, you may actually not have a problem, but your problem is you've got the wrong expectations. The average couple has sex 1 to 2 times a week, is what they find in research. But let me talk about the experience that most couples have. Most couples have, when they have sex, they're they find it very good 20 to 25% of the time. Great sex, 20 to 25% of the time. Good sex, 40 to 60% of the time. Fair but unremarkable, 15 to 20% of the time. And dissatisfying, 5 to 15% of the time. That's what most couples, they have sex 1 to 2 times a week. And let me just do the math here for you. Let's say it's 6 times a month. Let's say the average couple has sex 6 times a month. 1 is great. Of the 6 times that they had sex that month, 1 is great, 3 are good, 1 is fair, and 1 is bad. 1 time stinks. Okay. That's the average couple. And so what is realistic as an expectation in marriage? Well, I think 1 or 2 times a week of sex, that's great. If you have sex more often, that's great. You know, if you have sex less often than that, that might not be satisfying to your spouse. I'll talk about that more in just a minute. But let me talk about some other things we have to be realistic about. And the first is we won't have matching libidos most of the time. One of the greatest misconceptions about sex and marriage is that we're both going to have the same desire at the same time. Rarely in marriage will you have the same desire at the same time. Even when you both desire sex, you may want different things in sex. You may want to experience different things during sex. And so here's the issue. To have great sex in marriage, you have to have a servant spirit. In my book and in my series, Our Secret Paradise, I talk about the secret of ultimate sexual fulfillment. The secret of ultimate sexual fulfillment is the servant spirit. The only way your sex is going to, or your spouse is going to be fulfilled in marriage related to sex is for you to have a servant spirit, because most of the time when they have a desire, you don't have that desire. Now, 80% of men are more sexual than their wives, but 20% of women are more sexual than their husbands. And we get a lot of response from women that says, especially older women, that say, I want sex more than my husband. And he says he doesn't want sex. Well, let me just say something. In my opinion, who cares? Who cares if you want sex or not? If your spouse wants sex, you need to meet their needs. And I'm so thankful that Karen has done this for me over the years. She's sacrificially met my sexual needs, and I do the same for her. Because now that we're older, we have different bodies, different desires and all that. In your married life, rarely are you going to have a time where just everything comes on at the same time. You have sex. It's just that magic moment where your libidos hit this perfect crescendo at the same time. Let me say, when those moments come, enjoy, get dressed, drive immediately to the trophy store, make a plaque, put the time, the date, hang it over the bed as a commemorative plaque of that event. And every now and then walk by the bed, put your hand on it, cry, and pray, and get over it. Because most of the time, it ain't going to happen. And again, you got to get all the movies and all the nonsense out of your head. That's not real. I'm talking about reality. I've counseled thousands of married couples. Thousands of married couples. I've been around the world teaching this. I'm telling you, this is the way we are. And if you're having sex 6 or 8 times a month, good for you. Miss, that's pretty good. That's pretty normal. And if one of them's great, good for you. Good for you. If one of them's rotten, join the club. And stop griping about it. Because what they're saying here is that's normal, okay? So another thing that we need to be realistic about is you're going to have to plan sex to have good sex. Sometimes you're going to have to plan it. Karen and I planned sex. When our kids were at home, we don't have to anymore. I mean, we have our kids aren't home, but we would say, we called it being together. And we'd say, you want to be together Tuesday night? And Karen would say, yeah, Tuesday night. And then we would say, is it your night or my night? Her nights. We're different than my nights. But we would say, is your night or mine? And we would swap. Okay? And her nights meant, I'm coming into your world, and if there's any sex, I'm going to have to be patient, but a lot of talking, a lot of feelings. But You can plan it. Just put it on the calendar.